Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yashodanandana Vrajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Vrajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachakati Yamunatira Vanachakati Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yashodanandana Vrajana Yashodanandana Vrajana Yamunatira Yamunatira Vanachakati Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Madhava Shri Radhe Radha Madhava Shri Radhe Jaya Radha Giridhari Shri Radhe Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jnana Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivajikacharya Stottra Shata Shri Srimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jnana Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivajikacharya Stottra Shata Shri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Rantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Thai Gaura Premanandi So we'll start by reading from the Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita. The chapter is entitled New Jagannath Puri. That morning, as Prabhupada chanted prayers and led Kirtana, Linda didn't take her eyes off him. And when he asked everyone to chant Hare Krishna with him on beads, she excitedly accepted a strand from one of the devotees and tried to chant like him. Then he began reading the Sanskrit verse to begin his lecture, and Linda was captivated by the sound. If he were to continue with her graduate program in Greek, she would study Sanskrit next. So she listened with keen interest, proud that perhaps no one else in the room could understand as well as she. Later that same morning, she met Srila Prabhupada upstairs in his apartment. Linda. In the first conversation I had with him, Swamiji summed up Greek civilization for me in a couple of sentences. He explained that Srimad Bhagavatam was the source of stories like the Iliad and the Odyssey, and was the source of Platonic philosophy. I was thrilled. Of course, I believed him. I knew that whatever he was speaking was the truth. There was no doubt in my mind, and he didn't discourage my love for Socrates. He told me that Socrates was actually a devotee in disguise. Then he began telling me the story of Krishna as the butter thief. And I said, oh yes. I saw a dance about Krishna as the butter thief. He was very pleased, and he laughed. He said, oh yes, you know. This encounter with Swamiji was like meeting an old friend, because I felt completely at home and protected, and I felt I had found what I was looking for. Here I could use my intelligence and ask the questions I had always wanted to ask in school. Prabhupada initiated Linda, giving her the name Leelavati. Seeing her eagerness to serve him personally, he decided to teach her to cook by having her prepare his lunch. He already had a little weekend cooking class in which he taught Janaki, Govinda Dasi, Nandarani, and others the art of cooking for Krishna. Now he invited Leelavati to come. He would walk back and forth in the small room, showing the girls how to knead dough, cook chapatis, measure spices in the right palm, and cut vegetables. Contact me. You got to tell them class. Amani. They'll finish there. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So today we're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, the fourth canto, chapter 29. The chapter is entitled Talks Between Narada and King Prachina Barhi. Text 72. So I'll just read through the Sanskrit and stuff myself. Garbhe balye pyabhau shkalyad ekadasha vidhang tada lingam nadrishyate yuna kuvang chandra masoyata. Synonyms. Garbhe in the womb. Balye in boyhood. Api also. Apaushkalyat because of immaturity. Ekadasha, the 10 senses in the mind. Vidham, in the form of. Tada, at that time. Lingam, the subtle body or false ego. Na, not. Drishyate is visible. Yuna, of a youth. Kuvam, during the dark moon night. Chandramasa, the moon. Yata, as. Translation. When one is a youth, all the 10 senses in the mind are completely visible. However, in the mother's womb or in the boyhood state, the sense organs and the mind remain covered, just as the full moon is covered by the darkness of the dark moon night. Purport. When a living entity is within the womb, his gross body, the 10 sense organs, and the mind are not fully developed. At such a time, the objects of the senses do not disturb him. In a dream, a young man may experience the presence of a young woman because at that time the senses are active. Because of undeveloped senses, a child or boy will not see a young woman in his dreams. And what the senses are active in youth even when one dreams, and although there may be no young woman present, the senses may act and there may be a seminal discharge, nocturnal emission. The activities of the subtle and gross bodies depend on how developed the conditions are. The example of the moon is very appropriate. On a dark moon night, the full shining moon is still present, but it appears not to be present due to conditions. Similarly, the senses of the living entity are there, but they only become active when the gross body and the subtle body are developed. Unless the senses of the gross body are developed, they will not act on the subtle body. Similarly, because of the absence of desires in the subtle body, there may be no development in the gross body. Om Jnanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So reading the text one more time. When one is a youth, all the 10 senses and the mind are completely visible. However, in the mother's womb or in the boyhood state, the sense organs and the mind remain covered, just as the full moon is covered by the darkness of the dark moon night. Narada Muni is continuing to instruct King Prachinabarhishat in the science of the transmigration of the soul. And in reading these descriptions that he gives, more and more, I begin to see that actually the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, the transmigration of the soul, is actually very scientific, contrary to what most scientifically minded people may think. One of the major complaints by those who are brought up with a scientific background, Darwin's theory, so on and so forth, Big Bang theory. Generally, one of the complaints they have about spirituality is that it's not scientific. It's too airy-fairy, esoteric, and otherworldly. But actually, when you read through this section on the transmigration of the soul, actually, it's very scientific, it's very descriptive, and it's very clear as to how the soul transmigrates through so many different bodies. So thus far, in this description, Narada Muni, he's basically provided evidence to King Prachinabarhishat that there is a subtle body which exists separate from the gross body. He gave the whole analogy of the dream state, by which in a dream state, the subtle body, having stored so many experiences, memories, images, within it, it starts to bring all of those out and together in various ways. It's commonly said that if one has experienced seeing gold in this life and experienced seeing a mountain in this life, then they may, due to the nature of the mind, bringing two random experiences together in a dream, see or witness a golden mountain. And he's going on now to explain how the subtle body is not destroyed when the gross body senses are inactive, further giving evidence that the subtle body exists separately to the gross body. So when the senses are inactive, it's said that the subtle body temporarily loses its identification with the gross body. So in text 71, it explains, when their living entity is in deep sleep, when he faints, when there's some great shock on account of severe loss at the time of death, or when the body temperature is very high, or when the movement of life here is arrested, at that time the living entity loses knowledge of identifying the body with the self. So because the soul's identification with the body is not fixed, then it shows that the connection with the gross body is not eternal. It shows that the subtle body, it goes on beyond the gross body. And in this particular verse that we're looking at today, he's describing the changing conditions of the body between when the living entity is in the womb to when the living entity is a youth or an adolescent, a teenager. So the analogy is that just like a moon on a dark night is present but seems to be covered, the mind and the senses, whilst being present in the womb for the living entity who is embodied, and in childhood, they're also present but not fully developed. So explained maybe in a more simple way, between the womb to adolescence, the body and the mind, they go through changes. The conditions of the body change. Between the womb to childhood, you see that the body grows. And from when they're a baby till when they're a child, you see it, their senses become more and more developed to begin to perceive and interact with the world. When a child is born, as far as I've seen, there's very little understanding or perception of what's going on around them. A lot of young babies, they have their eyes closed for a period of time before they are then able to open their eyes and then start to hear and speak to their parents and so on and so forth. What to speak of when a person is a teenager, then the mind and the senses, they develop further, and the person experiences a whole different range of desires and pushings from the same mind and senses. So when a person grows up, naturally the conditions of the body changes and the desires of the person change as well. So I was reflecting on this, how between childhood to youth, it's a very, very turbulent period of life. When one becomes a teenager, the quote-unquote innocence that they had when they were a child, it gradually disappears. Puberty hits, and then life becomes very, very confusing. Urges which you didn't have before, they appear. Desires, thoughts, perceptions of yourself and the world, they start to change. And really, life just becomes more complicated when you become a teenager. My spiritual master, Devrita Maharaj, he often gives the example of his childhood when he... One second. Kavish has it because Kavish closed up on Friday. Yeah. So I have to just... Management duties are calling even while giving class. In any case, so my spiritual master there, he tells a story. When he was a child, he and his younger brother, they would play a lot. And one day he happened to come back from school, and he saw that his younger brother, along with his friend, they'd dug a hole in the back lawn of their house, and they were hiding in this hole. And my spiritual master, being the older brother, was thinking, like, well, what's going on here? Why is there a massive hole in the backyard? So he asked his younger brother, what's going on? Like, why are you doing this? Why have you wrecked the backyard? And his younger brother said, or whispered to him, we're hiding. And my spiritual master asked, hiding from who? The girls. So, yeah, at that point in their lives, girls, as a lot of young kids may say, were yuck, or they had cooties. So their perception of girls was a particular way. Further on in my spiritual master's life, when he was, a teenager and his brother was entering, teenage years, he comes home one day and he sees his younger brother and another boy fighting outside their house, and a whole group of boys within the neighborhood is surrounding them, egging them both on. And so, being the older brother again, he pushes through the crowd of young kids and gets his brother and, says, what are you doing? How can you do this outside our house? What's going on? And his younger brother says, I'm fighting. And my spiritual master says, fighting? Why? Why are you fighting? Because of a girl. So between childhood to the adolescent years, this whole perception of the opposite gender had changed the perception of the younger brother. I also remember when I first entered high school from primary school, I noticed a massive change in the behavior of the kids. When in primary school, I was quite sheltered, and things were quite peaceful. The kids, but they behaved themselves, and the teachers didn't have to try very hard to discipline the students. They were all very submissive. But then when I went to high school, secondary school, I remember wandering around the school and just observing what was going on, observing what all the older kids were doing, 14, 15 to 18. And it just seemed like I'd entered a whole different world. More or less due to their, the hormones, raging hormones within them, the male's testosterone, going through the roof. The men I was witnessing were just getting into fights on the field, next to the classrooms. They were yelling at each other. The girls were also part of it as well. The girls were all very loud and boisterous, and there was a whole different world. And I wondered, like, what planet I had landed on. But then, as the body changed for myself, then started to become normal. All these activities that were going on. But on a side note, actually, having co-ed schools like that, where boys and girls are allowed to mix freely, it actually, as we know, creates quite an abnormal situation. It's very distracting for both genders when they're able to mix and mingle from a young age. In the ideal setting, the ideal varnashram setting, both genders were kept separate, and trained in the gurukul for the men, and the women at home by their mothers, to perform not only their dharmic, their worldly duties, but also have some sort of spiritual center to their life, the basis of which is mind and sense control. Whereas in schools today, actually, there's no such thing as mind and sense control. It's just let your senses go wild. So essentially the point is, as the body develops, your desires and activity also develop and change. And this continues through every phase of life. Your desires at youth are different from when you grow into adulthood, and your desires in adulthood are also different when you enter into old age. Essentially because your body's changing. So I did some research for outreach reasons on the different types of desires that a person goes through when they go through these different phases of life, youth to adulthood to old age. It's quite interesting. So a young person, generally they desire peak experiences like amazing sensual experiences which blow the roof off their house. They desire also to gain a sense of identity and independence from their parents. Of course, it's different from culture to culture, but as the world becomes more westernized, this is becoming the way it is for everybody. They desire things like acceptance by their peers, sense of connection, and when they're in their teens, early 20s as well, then naturally they become interested in the opposite gender or the same gender, whatever it may be. They become interested in other people in the romantic sense, and there's a time for them to explore that. They become more adventurous and risk-taking as well. I remember when I was a younger person, I was taking risks, in sports, and I would cycle quite a lot. I'd go down hills really fast, basically breakneck speeds. Looking back, I could have, if I fell, I would have broken my neck. But there was a sense of wanting to take risks and to explore the world, to experience things. But then as a person enters their 30s, then their desires, they start to change. So they start to desire stability in their life. They start to desire some sort of material success. Instead of just jumping from relationship to relationship, they start to then desire a long-term romantic relationship and a stable family situation. And I can also relate to this. It's said that when they enter their 30s onwards, they start to desire more social status, and they want to accomplish things in the world. They want to grow personally. They want to find fulfillment. They want to find life purpose. And they feel a sense of responsibility to contribute to their family, look after their family and society. So we can see already, between the ages of 12 to 18 or 21, and then 21 to 30, 30 to 50, 60, the desires, they change significantly. And then in old age, people generally want to enjoy the simple things in life. Their desires, they shift more towards having reasonable health. Otherwise, if they don't look after their health, they'll be immobilized, they'll be crippled by their old age. Instead of desiring peak experiences or wanting to achieve things in the world, they just want peace. They want simplicity in their life. They've been there, they've done that, they've got the t-shirt, and they want to spend their time just enjoying the small things in life. And a good portion of their time, at least, is spent in reflection. Did I live my life to the fullest? Did I live my life in the best way? And also thinking about the future, their legacy. How will the family go on once I go? And some even may have spiritual concerns. What's next? Death is becoming more and more of a reality for me. Like, what comes after death? And if they're not so fortunate, they wouldn't have come across any substantial knowledge which allows them to answer that question. They also, if they're even less fortunate, then they might find themselves not even questioning that at all, and just hanging out at the bar, watching rugby with other people their age, and spending their last years in a drunken, intoxicated state and forgetfulness. So looking at this like objectively, clinically, all these desires that we experience in life as living entities, all they are just desires which appear due to the body going through a particular phase. Different phases mean a different set of desires. As we know also, the body goes through 6 stages: birth, growth, maintenance, byproducts, dwindling, and death. If we look at things from a clinical perspective, then when material desires pop up in the mind, no matter how significant they may be, then we generally don't take it so seriously. Especially when we understand through this science of the transmigration of the soul that we aren't actually this body. We aren't actually our minds even. These desires that appear in the bodies and the minds, they're just there for some time and they'll go, they'll change, they'll evolve, they'll develop. And then eventually the body will go. And then it's like hitting the reset button. You'll be born again. And if you're lucky, you'll be born as a human being, only to desire these things again. Essentially, how you feel now is not how you're going to feel in the future. Your perception, perspective of life is going to change. And your feelings and within the moment, within the week, within the month, within the year, they'll also change. This is quite helpful knowledge. One of my mentors from when I was in Wellington, I've first moved into a contemporary men's ashram there. I was talking to him, revealing my mind to him and expressing how I feel this difficulty and that difficulty and this insecurity, that insecurity. And he just told me straight up that for you, probably, and for anybody, it's actually best not to take your mind so seriously, not to take your desires so seriously. And it was very simple advice, but it was very helpful. And it's something that I reflect on, when I'm going through personal difficulty with the mind. The mind will do its thing. Chanchalang himana Krishna, pramati balavadritam. The mind will do its thing. But what you always have in these moments is devotional service. And instead of taking your mind seriously and its thoughts, you should take that seriously. And then the mind and its quote unquote needs will be tended to. The verse also is relevant, the ABCs of spiritual knowledge in the Bhagavad Gita, verse 213. As the embodied soul continually passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. A sober person is not bewildered by such a change. So generally, when I used to hear that verse, I used to focus on the fact that the body, or that death is just a change of bodies, and a sober person shouldn't be bewildered by the death of a loved one, their own death. It's like the taking off of garments, of clothes, and putting on new ones. But actually, for this particular class, I was focusing more on the first part of the verse, as the embodied soul continually passes in this body from boyhood to youth, old to old age, that part. And then I was relating that part to becoming sober, becoming a dheera. So how do those two relate? Basically, the body is just like a person should be sober in the face of death. We should also be sober in the inevitable changes of our body throughout life, through the different phases of life. Or the desires that come in, they may shock us, surprise us. When you turn 12, 13, you start to feel sensations that you never felt before. It's shocking. It's like, where did this come from? And then you become completely overwhelmed by them. But a sober person, or someone who's fortunate enough to have some understanding of Krishna consciousness, the philosophy, they will just see this clinically. This is just my body going through the inevitable changes of adolescence, of puberty. And these urges aren't going to last forever. Eventually, I'm going to get a new body. I'm going to get an adult body. I'm going to get an old man's body. But of course, because the education isn't there for most teenagers today, no one's fortunate enough to be able to understand this. So again, it also highlights the fact that, we need an education in society. We need an institution where people can come and learn about the science of the transmigration of the soul. They can learn how they're not their bodies. And despite feeling so many desires throughout life, actually, they're not obliged to fulfill them. It's not like you're being forced, or you don't have to feel like you're being forced to have to fulfill these material desires as they pop up. As the verse also goes in the Bhagavad Gita, apodyamanam achala pratishtang samudram apap pravashanti yadvat tadvat kamayam pravashanti sarve sashantam apnoti nakamakami. A person is not disturbed by the insistent flow of desires that enter like rivers into the ocean, which is ever being fulfilled but is always still, can alone achieve peace, and not the man who strives to satisfy such desires. Because a devotee is fortunate enough to be full within themselves through connection to Krishna, the ocean of happiness and satisfaction. Despite experiencing material desires, they don't feel obligated to fulfill them. They don't feel pushed. They don't feel forced to have to fulfill them. They understand that by attempting to fulfill them, they won't actually be fulfilled. And a quote which I like to think about as well, when the desires of the material body crop up, is that we shouldn't give up what we want most for what feels good now as devotees. Unfortunately, for non-devotees, they have no choice but to fulfill the dictates of their mind and body, to fulfill these desires. Some insignificant. I want to go out on the weekend. I want to hang out with friends and get intoxicated. Some seemingly more significant. I feel the need to find purpose in life, to get a good career. I want to settle down and have a family. They don't have a choice but to fulfill these desires, or make an attempt to. And according to their karma, they may or may not even get the fulfillment of these desires. But for the devotee, we have a choice. When faced by material desires, we have a choice to fulfill them or attempt to. But knowing that they won't satisfy us in the deepest way, we also have the alternative, which we can readily take advantage of, which is devotional service and Krishna consciousness. So I find that this knowledge is very important, and it's very helpful for anybody at any stage of life. But it's theoretically, to understand this is one thing, but to experience it, that is maybe even more important. Experience this, understand how this knowledge through application within your own life. As I said, as a devotee, by experiencing a high taste in devotional service, they no longer feel the need to hang on to material desires. That's not that we just, try to clamp down upon ourselves, and like Buddhists may, like some yogis may try to artificially control the mind and the senses. Actually, the process of devotional service, it engages the senses, and through engagement of the senses, naturally one experiences a higher taste, which makes one want to let go of the lower. This knowledge is also important, the Krishna conscious philosophy as well, because it gives us insight into what's in store in the future. I was meditating on the 5th verse of the Shikshastakam, and how Lord Chaitanya, he explains, Ayinanda tanuja kinkarang, atitang mang vishame bhavam budao, kripaya tava pada pankaja, stita duli sadrisham vachintaya. He exclaims, "Oh my Lord, O Krishna, son of Nanda Maharaj, I'm actually your eternal servitor, but somehow or another I've fallen into this ocean, this horrible ocean of birth and death. Please pick me up from this ocean of birth and death and place me as one of the atoms at your lotus feet." So living entities, people in this world, they make such a big deal about the happiness of this world. But the reality is, while you may be able to experience some happiness in this world, it's eventually going to be curtailed by birth, disease, old age, and death. So he implies within this exclamation that simply by being placed as an atom, a particle of dust at the lotus feet of the Lord, one gains a much more valuable position within existence. Simply by being devoted to the lotus feet of the Lord, even as a particle of dust, just, hanging out there, your position is far greater, far more valuable, far more significant than your position in the material world. What does that say also about the position of devotees who serve the Lord directly, who have intimate relationships with him? The gopis, Nanda Maharaj, so on and so forth, Yashoda Devi. So we have so much to look forward to in Krishna consciousness. Even one drop of happiness of love of Godhead is worth much more than the culmination of all bliss attained from merging with the I think this is anyway, sorry, my phone cut off. Maybe that's a sign that I should finish there in any case. So thanks for your attention. Does anyone have any comments or things to add?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Dandot Pranam.
Dandavat Pranam, Sari Krishna.
Thank you very much for enlightening that text 72. Yes, really very important to understand, and you chalked out your life history with your spiritual masters examples, that you cannot avoid what is happening in the childhood, boyhood, youthhood, then middle age, then progressing to old age. Everything is depends upon how it is becomes fructify or manifest. It is the question of manifestation of the desires time to time, and you drawn the picture. So the initially from the boyhood it shoots up, and slowly it gets try to settle in certain position, and then it becomes diminishing. So that is the stage of life, how the from childhood to the end of age it is flowing, and the chart really tells us how the life changes with the change of desires, and it gives us the knowledge that everything it depends upon your desire and stage of development. The stage of development differs from stage to stage. That's why Srila Prabhupada has given in the example that the moon, which is full moon, is covered by the darkness of the dark moon night, is really so important in this text, showing the desire is already there, but it doesn't manifest because of the stages of development. It manifests according to the development of the stages, and that's how it gives us the taste of the desire. But to maintain the, and because of this desires, today's world, people are getting so much so stressed. As you have given the example that the two friends, two brothers, were digging a hole and hiding in the certain stage of their boyhood, and suddenly they started fighting. This shows that the desires are changing from time to time. Earlier they are friends and they became enemy. So what is poking in? That is the desires. So when the desire changes, thing changes, the situation changes. So to regulate that desires, we need to uh, we need to modify our desire in the right direction. That is what the life settles in. And there comes in our guru, which teaches us the stages of life and how to develop the desire in the right direction with the help of guru. And guru teaches us, which is the best part of our controlling the desire in the right direction. And Srila Prabhupada, as our uh, Guru Parampara section, he has even devised such a platform so that we can present our desire in the right direction for a higher taste, and that will give us the solace of mind. And the text 634, which shows us the mind is so much uh, turbulent, it is very hard to control it. So, to control the mind, we need to subdue the mind in the right direction for a higher taste, and that will give us the right direction of the life. In the next verse 73, it says, the it is bija and then it is kutastha and then is about to fructify. So those stages are very, very important to understand how these things happening in our life. And to control that in the right direction, we need the right guidance from our guru. And guru tells us to how to control our senses and for a higher taste. And that is what the Krishna consciousness is. As you mentioned in this Shistastakam, fifth verses, that is what actually the prayer is. Just to take the dust of the lotus feet and become satiated with the Lord's activities, and the senses can be controlled. With the control of the senses, we can achieve the ultimate goal of life. And that is the teaching of this text. Narad Muni is addressing to Prachin Varishan. This is how you have to control the senses. Though are there, they are all right from the birth, but it doesn't get manifested. It gets manifested with the aging of the people and experiences all around. Thank you so much for enlightening this verse. It's a bit complicated, but it's very nicely mentioned. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Thanks for your summary. Very nice.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Dandavat Pranam.
Hare Krishna, Dandavat Pranams.
Thank you very much for a wonderful class and your the realizations. So at such an young age, I was amazed to see the realizations what you have, in fact, going throughout the life. So certainly it's come from your past births. That's what I can understand. and especially I like that point where you said in the second chapter where the Lord says the the sober person is not bewildered, and it's a very nice take you had on that. That it's not just the changing the body, but the changing of the desires. So I really like that, Prabhu. And the sober person is not bewildered by the changing of the bodily desires. Now, it's very, very nice insight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hare Krishna. You said it much more clearly than me.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, it appears there is no other person to make the comments. So thank you very much for the nice class. So the class may be concluded.
Okay. Thank you, Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Shintu Bhaya Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavabhyo Namo Namo Ananta Koti Vaishnavabhyo Ki Jai. His Grace Manobiram Prabhu Ki Jai. Prabhupada Ki Jai. Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bol. Glories to Assembly.